name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful, all praise is due to that Lord, the one that creates out of no need of his own except that he may be worshipped and be done so with day and night. It is out of his infinite mercy that we have been blessed with 14 immaculate guides. And these guides, no doubt, are for all of humanity, and their universality cannot be limited by no man, by no creation, except that creator which created them. The discussion for today on the poster, as many of you may have seen, is the role of youth within the legacy of social change. And I'm going to try and stick with the time because I'm not competing against a speaker, I'm competing against Salah, so I can't really run over that time. So it's a very strategic way of Project Zainab putting me before the Salah intermission. But inshallah, we'll strive on. But before that, whenever I give an Islamic talk, it becomes even more pressuring when in the audience there is such celebrated and decorated scholarship which is more worthy of this podium than myself. And so with the permission of my two teachers, Sheikh Ahmed Hanif and Sheikh Ayub, if you allow me to continue. In order for us to understand these two realms of social change and youth and working within the parameters of what Project Zainab is, it's a social change movement. It's a social activism movement. It's one of the things which we pride ourselves upon. The discussion today will look at these two elements of social change and youth, and then we're going to further dissect these two issues into further categories. The first category is the perception of social change within Western academia and Western theory, and the Muslim response or the Muslim establishment of social change. Then we're going to look at the Islamic perspective of youth and contrast that to the Western perspective of youth. The point being is that we have a massive role to play in social change as youth, but what does social change look like? What does youth look like? And what is our role within this parameter? Firstly, starting off, whenever we think of social change or we think of youth, as Muslim youth, I think that we face something called amnesia. It's very simple. We're very forgetful of our past. And as a community, we're very forgetful of these two key elements of social change and youth. And when it comes to social change, many times when I'm delivering workshops to Muslim youth, it's like, this is a Western construct. This is what the white man created. And people are normally bemused. They're like, oh, it's something which the United Nations has devised. Social change means a change within society, within that structure, for the betterment of society. And when we look at the people who claim to be the herald, like the beacons of social change within Western norms, we find people like the United Nations, we find people like the Commonwealth, the UK government. And they define social change in its economic perspective. I.e., social change is about empowering people so that they can be economically independent, but at the same time, sustain the economic norm within that society. The society which we live in is a capitalist society. Predominantly across the West, we see these norms, and I don't need to go into stating the obvious. I've already mentioned these in previous talks which I've given at Project Zainab events on the disease of capitalism which is affecting the Muslim community at large. But one thing to mention, when we speak about social change, the two elements which I've derived from the United Nations papers and anything which I've read, it comes down to these two elements, and that's empowerment, and development. So what does empowerment actually mean to them? Empowerment means, and as the examples were given before by Sister Sarah, empowerment for them is a very simple way of changing the norms in other people's societies. And this is not my words, this is words of feminists, radical feminists such as Batliwala, who done a study of when the United Nations intervened within places like India. These people who we think are the empowering forces of our nations intervened into India and said, do you know what we're going to do? We're going to empower these women. And the World Bank in 2002 funded a program whereby they empowered women through giving them short-term loans. And what happened as a result? These women became autonomous. They became independent. And so the World Bank came away and they produced a report and they showcased this. India, we're empowering people. We've come in and we've funded all of these programs and all these things which are happening to empower. And because they saw economic progress, they defined that empowerment as a success. However, when a feminist critique comes forward, like Batliwala, she comes forward and she writes, after studying for 5 years the situation, she realized that domestic violence increased because men were not included within that discussion. The structure hadn't changed. And she highlights something which is very important. Empowerment in the Western notion or in the Western governments is not about empowering you to change society, to become change makers or social revolutionaries. Rather, it's the illusion of giving you autonomy. And this is backed up by the fact that there is another writer, Cornwall, who uses a theory called imment. He says when people institutionalize empowerment, they take the power away from empowerment. With that case study in mind, the second key element which the United Nations says is one of their key change makers or ways that they change society is through development. And in the 21st century, we have the likes of Michael Jennings, who's a professor at SOAS, saying that development is about sharing resources. Because resources, just imagine if you had a massive bowl of, you had a massive jar of sweets. And one jar was completely full. Now I've realized that there's another jar which is empty. I have to put sweets into that other jar. That is development. In the 21st century, they start using words like rights-based development. No longer are we the missionaries that are going to spread Christianity and feed the people and force feed them into our religion. But right now we have to start empowering the victim. It's all about realizing that the only reason we're rich is because these guys, we abused them. We usurped what was theirs. And it's about correcting that balance, or so it seems. So what does this have to do? This is a perspective and critique which I've presented. And this is not my own critique. I've referenced and sourced Western critique of the Western forms of development. Yet, when you come to the Islamic perspective, and this is why I find it so baffling in the Muslim community, that we turn to the same people that are disempowering our communities to think that they have the solutions, that we as the grassroots have no power. So when the Islamic perspective of social change comes into place, there are three key examples. The first is the movement which is brought by Rasulullah. You heard from Sister Sarah the very key point that we see Rasulullah forbid the fact that you can bury your daughters alive. Many of us, we think that's a very easy statement to make, you know. It's like me coming into this room and saying, don't shoot anyone, because that's wrong. Obviously, no one's going to do that. But in a society when that becomes a norm, Rasulullah is changing the structure, the social structure. Today, when Muslims hear about feminism, they very much see the Western perspectives of feminism. They don't really understand what actual change and actually challenge that injustice may not necessarily mean feminism how we understand it. But true feminism, if it's to find and change the structures of society which are disempowering women, and to find different roles for women within that society, well then you have a groundbreaking second point in the life of Rasulullah when you see at Ghadir Qum. In Ghadir Qum, we see that Rasulullah institutionalizes a form of voting for women. Talk to me about suffragettes in the 1800s, 1900s. Talk to me about women and how they fought up in riots. But Rasulullah is giving women the right. How? He's asked, and as the scholars know, he orders that a bowl of water is presented forward, and that the women who are present to give bay'ah on one side of the pool of water to put their hand, and Amir al-Mu'mineen to put their others on the other side. In the social context of that time, these are radical changes. First example. Second example, Amir al-Mu'mineen in his discourse, so this is empowerment, true empowerment. We've just countered the United Nations perspective of empowerment and the critique which was given, and we found a solution. The second is Amir al-Mu'mineen's discourse when he gives and he talks about rights-based development. 21st century, Michael Jennings is talking about Rights-based development. Oh, it's a revolutionary concept that the West has come up with. These poor African people and poor South Asian people and poor Bangladeshis, we've gone in and intervened. You know, it's all about supporting them and looking after them. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, when you give sadaqah, place the coins into the palm of your hands and allow the person to take with their own dignity. What does that do? It reestablishes the fact that this rizq which you have been given is not your right. It is the right of Allah. And in another hadith, Amir al-Mu'mineen says, in the wealth of the rich lies the share of the poor. This is rights-based development. Understanding that those who are in need have a right upon us. And the third, final example of social change within Islam, the United Nations, when you look at their development model, they talk about sustainable development. How many of you have heard of sustainable development? Just put your hands in the air so I know if I need to explain. Okay, inshallah, I don't need to explain because of time is short. Sustainable development is essentially using enough resources in this lifetime so that the next generation's life is not compromised. Come to the Ahlul Bayt. No, come to the companions of the Ahlul Bayt. Abu Dhar is seen walking within the deserts. People are ridiculing him. Abu Dhar, what are you doing? He's like, I'm planting date seeds. They're like, date seeds, it takes a whole lifetime to actually reap the fruit of this date. He said, no, because I've eaten from the fruit of another date tree, I'm planting for the next generation. That is, in essence, sustainable development, which was set 1400 years ago. Today, the Western thought is saying in the 21st century, they've coined the term sustainable development. So we understand as Muslim youth that social change is in the very nature of Islam. These are three very simple examples. You pick up any of the lives of the A'immah and I guarantee you I can bring forward at least 3 more examples from my very limited knowledge of social change within their societies. So when we come to youth, today in the society we live in, I don't need to source studies, but if you want to go away, there's a Young Foundation study on youth, and it looks at what's wrong with this generation, and they say we're more individualistic, we don't believe in things like the welfare state, we don't care about society. And if you look at the culture which we're living in, it's all about recklessness, about spending this time of youth in things which you will regret for the rest of your life. But it's fine because, you know what, it's that one party we're going to. It's fine because, you know, we've got to go out and do it and book a mad place to go to and see for ourselves what haram is. So it's leading you towards a capitalist to commodify you, to make you enslaved within this society and within materialism. From the Islamic perspective, youth is not that. Youth is that golden time. Amir al-Mu'mineen says there are 2 things which a man will regret once they have gone. His health when he becomes ill, and his youth when he becomes old. Amir al-Mu'mineen in Munajat Sha'baniya says to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ilahi, I have wasted my youth. My Lord, I have wasted my youth. For Amir al-Mu'mineen to turn around and say this, it's highlighting that the youth is a massive time, a golden opportunity. You know, there's another saying which Imam Sadiq says, what is the role of the youth within society today? He says the role of a youth is either to learn or it's to teach. He could have stopped at saying learn, but he said if you know, then teach. To share your knowledge, to involve yourself within knowledge and to be surrounded with knowledge. The revolution of Rasulullah, coming back to the social change element, was powered by whom? The likes of Ammar. It was the likes of Amir al-Mu'mineen, who are youth. It wasn't powered by, actually on the contrary, majority of the enemies of Rasulullah were the elders who were set in their ways. The first, how old was he when he assumed his position? Amir al-Mu'mineen is a youth who is the power force of the movement of Rasulullah. So as it is a conference and an event which is looking at the life of Imam Rada, I thought it was befitting to reflect the final couple of minutes I have. Inshallah, I'm on time. Alhamdulillah. The final few moments that I have to wrap up this introduction, essentially. Because all I'm doing here is putting you in the direction, and myself in the direction, that we need to realize that we have 2 massive assets. One is a force and one is an element. I'm really apologetic to those that have passed the barometer, or rather the definition of youth. But there was another hadith which I read which was very nice, and it was saying that the one whose iman is still fresh, he is still youthful. So inshallah we can somehow make a compromise, Shaykhana, inshallah. But essentially, the element which I found very interesting was many times I'm asked the question that as Muslim youth, what is our role if you're saying we should be involved in social change and we shouldn't be, I'm not saying don't engage with United Nations, but I'm saying engage on a level that you realize your own self-worth, and organizations and institutions and policymakers will come to you to ask for your advice. And when we put our hope in the Imam and the Hujjah of our time, then no doubt anything is possible. And we talked about development, so what does Imam Rada say in this essence? And because we talked about sharing the wealth, and many of us don't have wealth, or we're not at that position, either we're riddled with this debt of student loans. Some of us are in 28K, still got more to go. But what does Imam Rada say? He says that helping the weak is better than giving alms. Now I'm going to leave the weak down to you. A weak could be a woman who is a widow within Iraq, and if you have capacity to make change there, then by all means do so. A weak person could be a woman in our community in London who has been suffering sexual harassment and abuse within our community, many of the case studies which Project Zainab has presented in the past. It could mean that the social hijab which we're practicing and abusing has caused certain females to feel very insecure and very weak within the community. So as Imam Rada says, helping the weak is better than giving alms. The second thing which I found which is absolutely awe-inspiring, and this is what I find is the point where I was trying to look for, like, the punchline. Every speaker, when you go to these speaker training days, they're like, you need to find a punchline. And subhanAllah, Imam Rada provides. This is from Fiqh al-Rada, page 369. He says, he who begins his day without being concerned for the affairs of Muslims, of the other Muslims, should not be called a Muslim. So it's time that we look beyond our own geographical notions of showing solidarity for causes on the basis of our nationality. It's time that I look beyond looking and saying, I'm only going to show solidarity for Shia genocide within Pakistan, or I'm only going to show solidarity for X, Y, and Z because I'm from that heritage. Your unifying identity is your Muslim identity. And with this in mind, and wrapping up, inshallah, I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that as youth, we are blessed with the opportunity that we can maximize this faculty, this time, this golden time, in order that we may serve the Imam of our time, in order that we may serve the message, and most importantly, beyond all, in the service of Allah, that we do not neglect the rights of the weak upon us. And with that, I'd like to draw this session, inshallah, this talk and the session to a close. If anything needs clarification, then my teachers are here, inshallah, from the Islamic perspective. And if there's anything which I can clarify from the social theory perspective, then I'm here as well. And with that, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.